I'm Juliet Scott Croxford, and this is Women and Worth.
Human rights are women's rights, and women's rights
For the record,
are human rights.
Feminism, by definition, is the belief that men and women should have equal rights.
You told the world that time's up on violence. You told the world that time's up on silence.
Justice is not a concept we read about in a book. Justice is about how much ladies get paid.
They say it's a myth, but it's not a myth, it's math.
This is the best time to be a woman. I want young women to really understand that and believe it. It's not that there aren't barriers. Of course there are barriers.
For 5 episodes now, we've tackled gender diversity in the workplace, the motherhood penalty, how philanthropic giving is evolving, career pivot points, and opportunities for investing in women. This is season 1 of Women and Worth, Female Fortunes. We've heard from leading asset managers, inspirational founders, and boundary-defying attorneys. So what are we missing? Arguably the most important piece of all, how to live meaningfully. Carrie Schwab-Pomerantz joins us for our final episode this season to share her insights.
If every school taught personal finance, basic money management, then we'd take gender out of the equation.
Carrie Schwab-Pomerantz is the chair and president of the Charles Schwab Foundation and senior vice president of Charles Schwab. We speak with her today from the Schwab Studios in San Francisco. Hi, Carrie. Thank you so much for having us here today.
Thanks so much. It's an honor to be with you, Juliet.
So, Carrie, much of your career has focused on increasing financial literacy and security. I want to start by talking about the path that led you there. Was there a moment in your life that set the whole thing in motion, or was it a given the family-run business background?
Well, first of all, I always say apples don't fall far from the tree. I guess that's just the way it is, because you're thinking, where did it come from? I have no idea. But given, that my father built a company on the whole notion of democratizing investing and making it more accessible and less expensive so everybody could really participate in investing. Obviously, somehow I got that in the DNA. But also I had a personal life event, or I should say my family had a life event when I was very young. I was 9 years old. And at the time, my dad was a struggling businessman. He had started a couple businesses and they had not gone well. And then he and my mom divorced. My mom was your traditional homemaker. She, they met at Stanford. She was a Stanford Phi Beta Kappa, so she's brilliant. But she was a woman of her time. And I saw how they struggled. And it was kind of a big blow to our family. And I can't help to think about having some impression from that in terms of how I thought about my own life and my own financial independence, so that I was always dependent on me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really where it came from.
And 72% of Americans are stressed about money. What does that say about the state of the U.S. today?
There's a lot of stress going on around money in this country, whether you have it or not. Even people who have it are stressed out because they don't really know how to manage it. So I always tell people it starts with a plan. And it sounds so schoolish, but it doesn't have to be some formal plan. It can be just quietly sitting down and writing to yourself, how much money do I have today? What am I invested in? What do I owe? And how much money do I need for my future? Whatever it may be, your retirement or long-term goals or short-term goals, whatever. And figure out how much money or what do I need to do to get there? And that simple act of planning goes such a long way. I mean, there's so many statistics that show the benefits of planning, one of which 60% of Americans say that it reduces their stress around money.
And so you write a weekly personal finance column called Ask Carrie. What is one of the most interesting questions you've been asked?
Well, certainly I get asked so many different kinds of questions on anything, debt and Social Security, to just how do I get started? That's one of the biggest questions. How do I get started? But one question that was really interesting to me was sort of opining on this new FIRE movement. It's called Financial Independence Retirement Early, where young people are taken upon themselves to save a ton of money. I mean, they're committed to save, say, for the next, coming out of college for 20 years with the idea that they believe and hope and plan to retire in their 40s. And it was sort of music to my ears. I mean, the complete opposite of what we talk about in this country. I mean, the lack of savings is huge, but there's this little group it's very focused on it. And they're millennials. I called my boys, my two sons who are about that age, and they said, oh, yeah, we have friends that are trying to do it. And I said, where does that come from? And they said, well, you have to realize we kind of grew up in our own version of the gold rush. Bitcoin and technology stocks, the get-rich-quick concept. That's one thing, but that doesn't hit the majority of us. The majority of us work for a company. We get a salary and, a decent salary, and, we have to put the money away for our future. So the FIRE movement has a lot of possibilities, but also drawbacks that I think people really have to think hard about. And a couple of them is that if you do retire when you're 40, that means you probably have about a 50-year retirement that you have to pay for. Yeah. And your Social Security check will also be a lot less. So some of those factors have to be baked into your planning.
When someone asks you about the FIRE movement, are they asking you, do you think it's a good idea? Or are they asking you, how do we actually achieve that, and how do we retire?
It was more, for me, it was more of a good idea and what I thought about it more than what I do. Some of these young people are doing things I would never tell anybody to do, like don't use your heat in the winter. I mean, some of the stuff's great, taking a bus, not owning a car. They're living a whole nother level than I think the average American would live.
I want to switch gears and discuss a challenge that we're trying to address on Women and Worth, which is around accelerating progress for women amid the challenges that they still face, whether it's access to board, equity in pay, access to capital or investment. Back in 2016, Charles Schwab published a survey outlining the differences between men and women when it comes to their spending habits, and the results were really eye-opening. I think 70% of younger women worry more about having enough money later in life than they do about being healthy, whereas 54% of men took the same view. How do women manage their finances differently than men?
So I've been focused, or I have been working on the women investors, for the last 20 years or more, and the numbers are discouraging. Historically, women have been less engaged with their finances. They're more likely to abdicate their investing and lack confidence in anything to do with money. Now, all over these years, that is changing, which is exciting, but it's at a very slow pace. And I think it's changing a lot because of the 401k. It's forcing, maybe that's not the right word, forcing everybody to be an investor, whether you are more inclined to do it or not. Now, a study of ours showed, though, that young women aspire to be financially independent. So I think they see what they're going to confront, and so they've got the motivation. But unfortunately, they have a lot less savings and investing than young men, showing that this gender gap continues on. And we have a lot of work to do. So I'd like to share some of the statistics or some of the details.
Yeah.
The young women, as I mentioned, showed determination for financial independence. They were more likely to have a second job than the young men in the survey. They were more likely to spend less than the young men. But they had 40% less savings. Yeah. So, of course, the math doesn't work out right. Then we found in the survey that half the number of women versus men have investment accounts. So once again, they're not investing at the same rates as young men. I get a little discouraged. I do see incremental positive change, but we have still a lot of work to do.
One statistic that I also found interesting when reading about financial insecurity is that women take out more student loans than men, and they hold about 2/3 of all student loans and tend to take longer to pay them off. Why is that?
I was wondering that myself, to be honest with you. I don't really have the answer. I mean, is it, again, that our parents aren't teaching us about debt and the repercussions of it. Anna Marie Lasardi at GW, she showed a study that something like 50% of young people who've taken out college debt say they would do it all over again had they known how much they were going to pay. Imagine that. So with young women, I suspect they just hadn't been prepared. And then, of course, we all know that we earn 80 cents on the dollar, and so we have less money to pay off our loans, at least quicker.
And how does society need to change in order to address these shortcomings for women?
I do think it starts in the schools. If every school taught personal finance, basic money management, then we'd take gender out of the equation. It's got to be a combo or a partnership with parents teaching their children the same way and talking about the same important concepts. We can make a difference. And then obviously, there's legislation and so forth, great legislation out there to make sure that women get paid equally. I think more companies now are seeing they don't want to be part of this statistic.
We'll be right back. This episode is supported by our official launch partner, Charles Schwab. For more investing advice, visit www.schwab.com. Let's talk about the retirement crisis in the US. What advice would you give to those now entering retirement age?
When you're entering into retirement or maybe 5 years away, it's a really good time to start taking a hard look at what you have and also what you're going to need. So the first what you want to do is take a look at your budget and how are you spending? Where are you spending money? A great exercise is to categorize your spending between discretionary and non-discretionary items so that you know what's essential. The other is creating an income plan. Where's that money going to be coming from? Most of us will get Social Security. Some might have a pension. But a lot of us and most of us are going to rely on our 401k or our separate portfolio. And we recommend that individuals have approximately 25 times the amount of money they're going to need to withdraw the first year to cover their expenses. So if you need $50,000 a year to supplement your Social Security and whatever else you might have, you're going to need about $1.25 million of money or investments to cover that and to generate that income, that $50,000 for 30 years. So that's a good ballpark on how much money you're going to need. The other is cash. What we recommend is anybody prior to retirement to have 3 to 6 months of cash as an emergency. So you don't have to sell anything or borrow money. However, if you're close to retirement, I would highly consider having 1 to 2 years of cash so that, again, you have access to that and you're not in a position to sell your stocks at an all-time low. So cash is really important. And then, of course, you're going to have to look at your 401k. Do you roll it over? Do you reinvest it? Social Security is a big one. A lot of people start taking Social Security at 62 years old. But if you wait until you're 70, you can increase your benefit about 76%. So there's a big strategy. I think I highly recommend people to sit down with an expert on how to maximize your Social Security. And then lastly, of course, state planning is really important, although I think we should always be up to date with our state plan, but it's also a good kind of reminder to take a look at it.
And the workforce has changed in recent years. So roughly 1/3 of Americans now work in the gig economy. And that trend is expected to continue. Of course, the gig economy doesn't typically provide the kind of benefits of a traditional job like paid leave, a 401k, even health insurance. How can workers protect themselves from insecurity and prepare for retirement when they're freelancing?
That is such a tough one. I know some people, I'm thinking even like a real estate agent, which can make a big lump of money and then have dry income for a long, long time. I think you have to average out how much you make and what realistically you can spend. If you can afford retirement, which I know for some people it's just so hard, But finding a way to save, especially if you're in your 20s, 10% of your income to your retirement for the rest of your life, and you should have a relatively, safe or equal retirement than what you're accustomed to in terms of living. Going back to the gig economy, your income, you're going to have ebbs and flows, and I think you're going to have to be more diligent about putting money away in the good times to protect you in the not so good times.
And there's been quite a lot in the press around how women are falling behind in their retirement savings. Can you walk us through that problem?
Well, again, women, we have the unique challenges that men don't have. We earn 80 cents on the dollar on average. We go in and out of the workforce to care for children or elderly parents, and we tend to live longer. So what happens is we have more years of retirement to pay for with less money. So it's so important that we engage in our finances and put saving and investing high priority. And again, Social Security is less for us, so that adds more fuel to the fire. We're less likely to invest because we talked about different social and cultural issues. So it's all coming together to create this dire situation for women.
Yeah.
So if we could advocate for more women to take control and make them feel more comfortable, we'll come a long way.
I want to transition now to talking about what creates a meaningful life. Not only are you in charge of the Charles Schwab Foundation, but you're also involved in issues related to female empowerment. What is your philosophy on giving back?
So I fell upon philanthropy in my early 30s. I was a young mother, focused on my job at Schwab, by the way. And a friend of mine who was in banking, she invited me and about 6 other women to dinner. I was living in Atlanta at the time. And she brought the executive director of the Atlanta Women's Foundation. And at the end of the meeting, or at the end of the dinner, basically they brought us together and said, would we be willing to come together and raise $50,000 for 3 years in a row on behalf of women's economic empowerment? And that night, I went to bed tossing and turning. One, because I had never raised a dime in my life, and the thought of having to fundraise scared me greatly. But the other was I had this sense of excitement that there's actually philanthropy out there, that I could actually do something to help other women gain a level of financial security. So I said I would do it. And what I learned from that experience is the importance of passion, and that when you care so deeply about something, nothing gets in your way. And so I was picking up the phone, or if ever I was afraid, because I'm calling some pretty important people that I was intimidated by. And I just kept thinking, what am I doing this for? I really care about this issue, and I would do it. So that was my introduction to philanthropy. And to be honest with you, it opened my world totally.
In previous interviews, you've mentioned that despite your family name, you didn't grow up as, and I quote, a trust fund kid. How has your upbringing impacted your outlook on philanthropy and your work?
I would say that my childhood really has more to do with my work than my philanthropy. As I mentioned, my dad was a struggling businessman. I didn't have an allowance. We were just sort of a regular old kid, rode my bike and so forth. So I had my paper route when I was 13. I always wanted to have some level of money, by the way, again, just have that independence so I can go buy the ice cream cone if I wanted to. I started working for my dad when I was 16. I was a file clerk, and the company was a startup. It was really only 2 rooms at the time, where we had one room with our financial consultant sitting around an oval table, and with black rotary phones bringing our client calls. And then next door was my dad's office with a bunch of other executives. It was just tables floating around. It was nothing glamorous. So my dad was really busy. He was an entrepreneur, your typical entrepreneur. He was not necessarily sitting down with us and giving us life lessons every night at dinner. But he was a great role model, and both my parents were, and they taught me the power of work and the power of savings. Always been a saver. I've lived the part what I try to advocate for other people. And in fact, I've tried to raise my own children in the same way to benefit from both the power of saving and the power of work. Power of work gives you a sense of confidence and purpose in your life. And the savings gives you the choices and the confidence to do what you want to do.
And as the daughter of the family-run business, do you feel you were given any more or less opportunity than as a son would have been given, for example?
Let's just say I paid my dues in a big way. And when I did get promotions to an officer and so forth, I would get emails from colleagues that said, "It's about time." I'm okay with that. I'm proud to, again, have that strong work ethic, to work hard, to learn different aspects of the business, not to be a big cheese. I was in my early 20s, and I'd just gone through a training program with Schwab. It was the first of its kind for college graduates. And Bank of America just bought us. There was, I think, 20 of us in the program, and most of the young folks went into headquarter jobs. And I remember my dad specifically saying to me, if you want to understand the business, go out in the field, in the branches, and work with clients. That's where you're going to gain empathy for people and their money needs. It's also where you're going to really learn the business. And I spent a good 15 of my first years out in the field with clients. And I have a badge of honor around that, because not every executive here can say that they have worked with clients. And that's the heartbeat of our company.
And it's the hard bit as well. It's invaluable.
Yes, invaluable.
Carrie, as we end our conversation, I want to ask 25 years from now, what conversation will we be having around women's progress?
Oh, boy. There was a study, and I don't know who conducted the study, but they said at the rate that women are advancing in terms of pay will take us over 200 years to achieve parity.
Yeah, it came out in the World Economic Forum.
That's right.
That's
right. And that's pretty disappointing.
It's alarming, I think.
Yeah, alarming. That's a better word. It's got to start with financial literacy in the schools, again, to take gender out of it. And it's something that has to continue on, the education. It has to continue on in the workplace. In fact, I think if we're going to change this whole lack of financial literacy, which will, if we change it for everyone, we're changing it for women, then we need all sectors of society to come together. We need families to talk about it. We need local and federal government to be doing their part. We need employers to do it, and families and nonprofits and schools and everybody coming together to solve this issue, because there's so many different points in a person's life where it's a learning opportunity around basic money management.
And finally, Carrie, what does worth mean to you?
Worth to me means security and having a purpose-filled life.
That's amazing. Carrie, thank you so much. That was really great.
Oh, okay, thank you. Did I hit it okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
That was Carrie Schwab-Pomerantz, the board chair and president of the Charles Schwab Foundation and senior vice president of Charles Schwab. And that's it for this episode and for the season. Thank you so much for listening. Please rate and review Women in Worth, or better yet, subscribe on your favourite listening app. Join the Women in Worth community by subscribing to our newsletter on worth.com. Stay tuned for our next season focusing on female founders. Until then, I'm Juliet Scott Croxford. Women in Worth is produced and edited by Karsha Brusalian. Special thanks to Worth SVP of Strategy and Growth, Alicia Hamilton. This episode is produced with support from our official launch partner, Charles Schwab. For more investing advice, visit www.schwab.com.